The snow was so bright it felt like staring into an interrogation lamp. Midday sun hit the hard-packed crust and threw it back into their eyes, bleaching color out of everything. Uniforms, rocks, blood, until the whole basin looked like a clean sheet laid out to catch bodies. A platoon-sized element lay scattered behind whatever cover the mountain allowed. A low berm of frozen dirt, the bent spine of a wrecked utility vehicle, a few rock outcrops that barely rose above the drifts. Men pressed their faces into the snow like they could disappear into it. Their breath came out in short, panic clouds that hung low and then vanished in the wind. The first rule out here had been simple. Don't skyline on ridges, don't bunch up, don't move like you're being watched. That rule had become a cruel joke. A soldier tried to crawl from the wreck toward the berm. Just a meter, just enough to get behind the rise. He moved carefully, elbows digging in, boots dragging. His mouth open like he was about to say something, maybe a curse, maybe a prayer. Then his body went slack mid-breath. There was no muzzle flash, no crack that gave away direction. Just the flat, wet sound of impact and a spray of dark that looked almost black against the white. For half a second nobody reacted, because half a second is what it takes the mind to catch up to the idea that a man can be alive and then not. Then the basin filled with frantic shouting that died, just as quickly, as if the air itself punished sound. Someone yelled for him to stay still. Someone else yelled that he was hit. A third voice, high, cracking, kept repeating, "Where is it? Where is it?" like the mountain might answer. They had already been in this for an hour. It felt like a week. The count had stopped being whispered and started being said out loud, like saying it would make it less true. 74 hit across multiple squads. Some were gone, faces turned away from the sun as if embarrassed. Many were alive but bleeding into the snow, their bodies trembling from shock as much as cold. A few were silent in that worst way, eyes open and fixed on nothing. All of them were trapped under invisible precision fire that arrived with perfect timing, always when someone tried to do the right thing. A hand reached for a radio. The handset answered with a hiss, flat, unnatural, too steady to be wind. Another radio did the same. A third coughed a broken syllable and then drowned in static again. Calls to higher command didn't fail like a weak signal. They failed like someone had slammed a door. "Try the other channel," someone shouted. The radio operator, what was left of him, lay face down near the wreck, one glove still wrapped around the mic. The bullet that hit him had chosen its moment with surgical contempt, mid-transmission, mid-coordination. Leadership and comms erased in a single squeeze. The geometry of the kill zone revealed itself the way bruises reveal themselves, slowly, then all at once. Every time someone moved, they were hit from above, from an angle that made cover feel like a rumor. The rounds didn't come from one direction. They came from the mountain's high ground, but the high ground was everywhere. A ridge line, a shelf, a fold in rock that could hide a shooter. The basin was a bowl, and they were the center. A medic in white over snow gear moved anyway. She didn't run. Running was a confession. She moved in short, controlled bursts. 3 seconds, freeze, assess, breathe. The first time she shifted, voices snapped at her. "Medic, stay down. Get back, get back." She didn't answer. Answering meant raising her head. Raising her head meant becoming a target. She slid behind the wreck, pressed her back to cold metal, and waited. The air felt charged, like the basin itself was listening. When nothing hit, she moved again. Her hands were steady, not because she wasn't afraid, but because fear was useless until it could be used. She reached a wounded team leader near a rock outcrop, a man trying to keep his jaw from chattering as he held pressure on his own thigh. Blood seeped between his fingers, darkening the snow beneath. She didn't waste words. Tourniquet, tighten, lock, check pulse below. Her gloves were slick with someone else's life, and she treated it like a task that had to be done, not a tragedy that had to be mourned. A bullet cracked stone inches from her face. It sounded like the mountains spitting. She didn't flinch so much as recalibrate. Her shoulders lowered. Her breathing slowed. Her eyes tracked the impact point, then the angle of the chip, then the shallow furrow in snow where the round had skipped. The shot wasn't random. It was a warning, a correction. Someone out there had seen her move, and had decided she could be spared if she behaved. She dragged the team leader back behind the rock outcrop, using his vest straps like handles. He tried to help, and she slapped his hand down without looking at him. Move and die. Stay and maybe live. When he was in cover, she leaned in close, mouth near his ear, voice low enough it could have been the wind. Don't talk on the radio. He stared at her, confused, then angry. We need. She pointed at the dead radio operator, pointed at the soldier who had crawled, pointed at the line of bodies that lay like breadcrumbs across the basin. Every time, she whispered, every time someone tries to coordinate, shots come. He blinked, and she watched him process the impossible. The enemy wasn't just shooting. The enemy was directing, timing shots to movement, to comms attempts, to anything that looked like a plan forming. That meant they weren't being hunted by a lone marksman. They were being dismantled. She dragged another casualty behind the same rock outcrop, then lifted binoculars for a single heartbeat. The ridgeline across the basin looked blank, wind-carved drifts, jagged stone, a few dark scrubs poking through snow. No movement, no flash, no obvious hide, just a wall of white and gray. A round snapped close enough to make the air crack. She dropped the binoculars, pressed into the rock, and waited again. The silence after the shot was worse than the shot itself. It was the enemy telling them, without words, that everything they did was seen. Somewhere far off, beyond the ridges, the faint thump-thump of rotor blades reached them. A helicopter. A promise. The sound grew for a moment, then faded, as if whoever was flying had taken one look at the basin and decided not to die today. The medic listened until the last beat vanished. Time pressure wasn't a concept anymore. It was a physical weight, an extraction window that was closing while men bled. She looked left along the basin's edge and saw it, a narrow ravine line, a crease in the terrain that dipped away from the bowl. Dead ground, a place the sniper's line of sight couldn't easily reach unless they moved. The route looked impossible, steep, drifted, exposed in parts. But it also looked like the only piece of terrain that wasn't already owned by the unseen shooter. She slid a hand in her chest pocket and felt the paper there, folded, worn, protected by body heat. She pressed her thumb to it for half a second, like touching it could anchor her to something human. Then she tucked it deeper and made a decision. The morning had started like so many others, cold, clear, bright enough to fool you into thinking nothing bad could happen. At the outpost near the ridge line, their breath had hung in the air as they checked gear, tightened straps, stamped snow from boots. The mountains around them were white and sharp, and the wind had a way of finding every gap in clothing, every weakness in seams. Long sight lines stretched across the pass, and the silence felt clean. The mission brief was routine on paper. Escort a small technical team to a remote sensor site tucked near the pass. A surveillance relay that fed movement data back to command. The sensor had gone quiet overnight. Could be weather. Could be a power issue. Could be nothing. Or it could be someone had found it. The platoon leader, young, competent, eyes that tried too hard to look older, laid it out with a map on the hood of a vehicle. Insertion on foot. Quick check. Fix or swap components if needed. Get out before mid-afternoon when weather could shift. The helicopter would be on standby for extraction at a designated point near the ridgeline. Tight timeline. Speed matters, the lieutenant said. We're not camping on that site. The senior NCO, loud, broad, the kind of man who had survived long enough to think volume could control fate, kept glancing at the medic like she was an inconvenience. She's here for bandages, he muttered to someone, not quiet enough. Not a gunfight. The medic didn't react. She stood near the tech gear, adjusting a strap that had twisted, retaping a loose battery pack. Her movements were small, efficient, invisible. People didn't notice her until they needed her. She checked hands for frostbite, marked blood types on tape, counted tourniquets without looking like she was counting. She had a way of making preparation look like habit instead of anxiety. Cold weather made everything harder. Batteries died faster. Optics fogged if you breathed wrong. Snow made every step loud if it crusted. It also made blood show up like a confession. The danger of skylining on ridges was hammered into them in every brief, because the mountain loved silhouettes. As they stepped off, the medic kept her place near the rear, assigned to the technical team. She didn't argue. She didn't ask for a different slot. She simply watched, not in the way a nervous person watches for threats, darting eyes, and tense shoulders. In the way a shooter watches, measuring angles, reading cover, tracking where the terrain folded and where it betrayed you. Her eyes didn't look for enemies. They looked for lines. They passed a small civilian shepherd line at distance, a few figures moving slowly with animals, tiny against the white. The lieutenant made note. The senior NCO dismissed them as irrelevant. The medic watched anyway. Non-combatants out here weren't background. They were a moral constraint written in flesh. One wrong shot, and the mission became something else. The sensor site sat on a shelf near the pass, partially dug into rock, protected from wind by a shallow berm. When they reached it, the first thing they noticed was not the sensor housing. It was the snow. Disturbed. Not drifted. Not wind-scoured. Disturbed in a way that said feet had been there recently. The tech knelt by the housing, popped a panel, and a faint metallic smell rose. Hot electronics, burnt insulation. He swore under his breath. "This isn't weather," he said. A cable had been cut cleanly. Not snapped. Cut. The tech traced it with gloved fingers and frowned. The radios worked at first. Crisp enough. Then they wobbled. A hiccup of static. A brief warble, like someone else speaking under the channel. Then clear again. The tech glanced at the handset and said, "Relay's dirty. Feels like interference." The senior NCO rolled his eyes. "It's the mountains. Everything's dirty." The medic saw a boot print pattern near the edge of the shelf. Spacing too deliberate, weight distribution too consistent. Not the sloppy churn of a patrol. Not the random scatter of civilians. Disciplined. Measured. As if someone had walked with purpose and patience. She stared at it for a second longer than she should have. "Move it," the senior NCO barked. "We're behind schedule." She didn't argue. She simply turned away and followed. And when she checked her own pack, she did it with the quiet guilt of someone who knows the truth but isn't allowed to say it. Minimal ammo. Minimal magazines. Because she was not a shooter. But tucked into a side pouch was a compact optic tool, and folded behind a medical checklist was an old marksmanship data card. Creases worn soft from being opened and closed, like a habit she couldn't quite kill. And in her chest pocket, warm against her sternum, was the folded paper. Photo, letter, commendation. Something from before, something she never let anyone see. When they moved off the shelf and into the shallow basin, the world changed in one shot. The radio operator dropped while keying his mic. That was the first proof. The enemy wasn't guessing. They were waiting. The lieutenant grabbed his handset and tried to call back to the outpost. The response was that flat hiss, steady as a machine. He changed channels. Same hiss. He tried a different set. Same. Communication didn't just degrade. It died. The machine gun team shifted to set up, trying to lay down suppressive fire toward the ridgeline. But suppressive fire needed a direction, a target, a reason. They had none. The ridgeline was a blank wall. They fired anyway, and the rounds chewed snow and stone without consequence. It was like screaming into the wind. The sniper, because there had to be a sniper, kept firing only when someone moved. A soldier tried to drag a wounded friend by the vest. A round arrived. Another tried to raise his head to scan. A round arrived. Someone lifted a radio to his mouth. A round arrived. Friendly movement became a death sentence. Then the second wave hit. An RPG team opened from a lower flank, angled to slam into the wrecked vehicle and the berm, trying to strip away what little cover they had. The explosion wasn't huge, snow muffled it, but it threw fragments that cut faces and hands. It made men flinch, and flinching in this basin got you killed. Casualties multiplied like a math problem nobody wanted to solve. The medic moved because she had to. Her job wasn't to win the fight. Her job was to keep men alive long enough for someone else to win. Tourniquets, pressure dressings, airway positioning, hypothermia prevention in the middle of a firefight. She worked with the calm of someone who had learned that panic was contagious, and she couldn't afford to spread it. The extraction window ticked closer. Mid-afternoon, weather shift. helicopter fuel, pilot risk tolerance. All those factors the lieutenant had spoken about like they were lines on a timeline now felt like a vice closing around their throat. The route back was as lethal as forward. They were pinned in the bowl, bleeding. The lieutenant got hit, shoulder, maybe collarbone. He was alive, but pain turned his face hard and pale. Squad leaders argued in low, furious voices that kept cutting off whenever a bullet snapped too close. Smoke went out, canisters rolling into the snow, blooming gray. It was meant to give them cover. Instead, it gave them a new kind of blindness. Snow glare plus smoke occlusion. They couldn't see. The enemy still could, at least enough to punish silhouettes when they moved against the white. The medic watched the timing. Shots paused when smoke thickened. Shots resumed when the wind cleared patches. Patient, disciplined. Someone out there had the kind of control that didn't come from luck. A wounded soldier's weapon overheated from firing in panic. The metal steamed in the cold. Magazines emptied. Ammo began to thin, wasted on a blank ridgeline. She crawled to the lieutenant, kept her body flat, pressed into the snow. She leaned close, mouth near his ear. "They're listening," she whispered. "We're watching for comms. Every time someone tries to talk, shots come." He stared, then glanced at the dead radio operator, then at the men who had been hit mid-call. Understanding spread across his face like frost. He lifted a hand and signaled silence. Stillness. Hand signals only. Protocol shattered. Improvisation took over. That was when the medic saw the ravine line again and understood what it meant. The sniper's line of sight was anchored to the basin. If she could get outside the bowl, get off axis, she might see what everyone else couldn't. She might find the angle. Staying meant slow death. Too many wounded. Too little cover. The sniper could wait longer than they could bleed. She didn't ask permission. Permission was a luxury. The senior NCO caught her eye as she shifted. "Where the hell do you think you're going?" She slid the lieutenant's map toward her, pointed to the ravine crease. Dead ground. A fold in the terrain that could hide a crawl. The senior NCO sneered. "You're not going anywhere. You're a medic." She didn't flinch. She didn't argue. She simply pointed again and then pointed at the line of bodies. The basin was eating them. The ravine was the only mouth that might lead out. The lieutenant, pale and bleeding, stared at the map and then at her. He didn't need a speech. He needed someone willing to do the thing nobody else could. He nodded once. The medic stripped weight, left extra kits behind, painful but necessary, kept essentials, tourniquets, a few dressings, something to keep a man from freezing. She took a compact radio handset, even if it was jammed, because sometimes the jam wasn't total. Sometimes the enemy made mistakes. She pulled a rifle from fallen soldier, checked it with quick, practiced hands, magazine seated, chamber status, optic clarity. Her glove shook for the first time as she reached into her chest pocket and touched the folded paper. The warmth there was human, a reminder that she had been someone before she was just a medic. She pressed her thumb to it, then tucked it deeper and moved. The ravine swallowed her quickly. Knee-deep drift, crusted ice beneath that threatened to crunch. She stepped where wind had scoured, where rock poked through, where sound would be eaten. Her breath came slow, controlled through a scarf. She counted steps, not like marching, but like measuring time between exposures. A round snapped overhead, not close enough to hit, close enough to tell her she was being tested. She froze instantly, becoming part of the snow. Stillness so complete it felt like holding her breath could betray her. She waited. No second shot came. Either the sniper hadn't seen her clearly, or the sniper had decided she wasn't worth the bullet yet. She moved again, using wind direction to hide sound, using sun position to predict glare. Bright daylight could betray a shooter as much as it betrayed targets. If she could keep the sun at a certain angle, her silhouette might blend. If she could stay in shadow where the ravine cut deep, she could disappear. Her fingers brushed something half-buried, a thin antenna wire, stiff with cold, running along the snow like a vein. She followed it with her eyes. It led toward a rock spur that jutted from the ravine wall. Confirmation. Someone had set up a jammer or an observer node nearby. The flat hiss wasn't terrain. It was intentional, a piece of the kill chain. She moved toward the spur with a predator's patience, keeping her body low, rifle cradled. Her heart hammered against ribs, but she forced her breathing into a pattern. Inhale, hold, exhale. Fear contained. Function prioritized. She spotted a civilian shelter far off through a break in the ravine. Just a dark shape against snow, smoke rising faintly. A reminder that this wasn't a blank battlefield. That any shot she took had to be clean. Restraint wasn't hesitation. Restraint was competence. The ravine narrowed, and the ice shelf appeared. A slick, angled lip that climbed toward a concealed ledge. It looked like a bad idea. It also looked like the only way to get eyes on the ridge line from the side. Her hands went numb as she climbed. Gloves scraped on rock. Boots slipped on crust. She looped a strap around a protruding stone and used it as a makeshift safety line, pulling herself up in short, controlled movements. Every scrape felt loud. Every breath felt like it could echo. When she reached the ledge, she pressed herself into shadow and peered out. The geometry finally made sense. The ridgeline everyone had been staring at wasn't the true threat. The unseen shooter wasn't simply lying prone on the obvious high ground. The shooter had found an off-angle hide, partially behind a rock fin, tucked into a depression that would never reveal a flash to anyone looking straight on. And near the rock spur, crouched low, was a second element, a spotter with optics and a small setup that looked like a radio rig, wires feeding into the snow. A system, not a lone gun. Maneuver elements held flanks lower down. Dark figures moving carefully through scrub, ready to punish any attempted breakout. An RPG team shifted position near a cluster of rocks, preparing another shot at the wreck. The medic settled the rifle onto her pack, elbows anchored, body aligned. She checked the optic, fog at the edges, but clear enough. She adjusted without hurry. Hurry was how you missed. She built a target ladder in her mind the way she had once built shot charts. Force multipliers first. Cut the strings before you cut the puppet. Jammer and spotter. Without them, the enemy's timing advantage collapsed. Commander or signal lead. Without them, the enemy's coordination broke. RPG teams. Without them, the unit's cover might hold. Any crew-served weapon anchoring the basin, if present. The sniper last, because the sniper was the most dangerous and the most likely to relocate after the first disruption. Her finger rested on the trigger. Her breathing slowed. The world narrowed to a rectangle of glass, and a man hunched over a rig. She fired. The rifle bucked into her shoulder. The sound was swallowed by the ravine and the wind. Through the optics, she saw the spotter jerk, collapse, hands slipping off the equipment. The jammer hiss in the world didn't stop instantly. Static didn't make noise in her ear at this distance, but she felt the change like pressure easing. The kill chain had been cut at the first link. Down in the basin, the effect was immediate. Radios didn't suddenly become crisp and perfect, but the flat, unnatural blanket hiss lifted. A handset chirped, a broken fragment of voice squeezed through, then cut. It wasn't much. It was everything. The enemy reacted with confusion for half a second, the kind of half-second that wins fights. The RPG team exposed itself to reposition, trying to find a better angle. The medic tracked the movement, waited for a clean silhouette against snow, fired. One figure dropped. The second tried to scramble, and she fired again. 2 controlled shots. The next volley died before it was launched. She shifted her optic to the cluster near the rock spur. Bodies looked to one man more than others. He gestured, sharp and authoritative. The signal lead, the one holding the plan together. She steadied, exhaled, fired. The man folded as if strings had been cut. The figures around him hesitated, suddenly unanchored. Cohesion didn't shatter with noise. It shattered with uncertainty. In the basin, the lieutenant caught the change like a dog catches scent. He didn't waste it. He signaled a bounded withdrawal. Short movements between cover, machine gun re-anchoring to smarter angles, not shooting at nothing but holding arcs. Men who had been pinned began to move in inches, then meters. The medic kept working her ladder, scanning for anything that would retie the enemy's strings. That was when the enemy adapted. A new sound threaded through wind, a faint buzzing, mechanical, rising and falling as it fought thin air. A small quadcopter drone lifted above the ravine line, searching for movement, searching for the source of disruption. It hovered like an insect, then drifted toward her ledge. At the same time, two climbers began to flank from below. She didn't see them at first. She felt them, a shift in the air, a scrape, the faintest crunch that didn't match wind. Her instincts, the ones she had kept buried under bandages and protocols, woke fully. Constraint piled onto constraint. Her borrowed rifle's optic began to fog at the edge. She wiped it once with her sleeve and cursed silently when it smeared. Seconds bled away. She went quiet. Relocation wasn't dramatic. It was 2 body lengths, a slide into deeper shadow, a change in angle. She packed snow against the edges of her position to erase straight lines, to make herself less human to a searching eye. Silence became armor. The drone drifted closer, its camera gimbal twitching. She could shoot it, but shooting it might reveal her exact location. She could let it find her, but letting it find her meant a grenade on her ledge. She listened for the climbers. Heard the scrape again. Closer. She made a choice that felt like swallowing a stone. She let the drone pass slightly, then flicked a small scrap of cloth, white against white, barely visible, into a patch of sun a meter away. The drone's camera snapped toward it like a hungry thing. For 1 second, it hovered over the wrong spot. She rolled her body into a new angle and fired once, not at the drone, but the thin support arm that held its camera. The bullet clipped it. The drone shuddered, lost stabilization, and spun away, rising in a panic and drifting off toward the ridge where its operator might be. A heartbeat of confusion, then a rock chipped near her face. The sniper, still alive, still dangerous, had shifted firing lane. Without the jammer's timing, the shots weren't arriving exactly when the unit tried to coordinate, but they were still lethal. The shooter was trying to bait friendly movement, trying to reassert dominance through fear. The medic ignored it. Fear was just information. It meant the sniper was still hunting. Down below, the bounded withdrawal continued. Men dragged wounded with straps and discipline now, not panic. The machine gun team laid controlled fire at likely positions, not to kill ghosts, but to keep heads down. The lieutenant's voice came through the radio in broken fragments, but it was enough. Enough to coordinate. Enough to survive. The medic scanned for the Overwatch sniper. Finding a well-hidden shooter wasn't about seeing the shooter. It was about seeing what the shooter disturbed. A line that wasn't natural. A shadow that didn't match. A piece of snow that shifted against wind. She saw it when the sniper tried to relocate. A brief exposure, a shoulder, a dark sliver, a glint that wasn't sun but glass catching wrong. He moved like someone who knew how to be invisible, which meant he had trained, which meant he believed he was untouchable. She was off axis now. She wasn't looking from the basin like everyone else had been. She was looking from the side, from the one angle his hide didn't protect. She steadied her breathing. She ignored the cold in her fingers. She ignored the tremor in her arm. She fired. The recoil punched her shoulder, but she stayed on the optic. She watched the sliver disappear, then reappear as a collapse, a slide. The sniper's rifle clattered against rock. The body slumped awkwardly, caught between stone and drift. For a moment the mountain was quiet in a new way, the absence of a predator. Then the enemy tried one last push. Mortar-like impacts bracketed her ledge. Not true mortars, but grenades lobbed from below, timed and placed with intent. Snow erupted. Rock fragments peppered her gear. The message was clear. If they couldn't find her with eyes, they'd collapse the place she might be. She had one magazine that still mattered. Ammo constraint peaked like a cliff edge. Every shot now had to be worth more than a life. It had to be worth time. She fired at movement below. One climber as he exposed himself, then another as he tried to duck. Not perfect, not pretty, but enough to stop them from coming up. Then she did something cruel and smart. She dropped her pack into a patch of sun and let it slide slightly, like a body shifting. She waited. A shot cracked, coming from lower, desperate now. Someone trying to prove the sniper wasn't gone. Someone trying to reclaim the kill zone. The round hit the pack, tore fabric, and sent a puff of stuffing into the air. That was confirmation. The Overwatch threat was down or displaced enough that someone else was firing blindly. Cohesion had broken. The enemy was no longer a machine. It was a collection of frightened men with guns. In the basin, friendly forces seized the opening. They pushed to a rock line that gave them better cover and a clearer path toward the extraction point. Wounded were dragged in pairs, then in fours, bundled to keep them from freezing. Smoke was used smarter now, not as a blanket, but as a screen to mask specific movements. The lieutenant's hand signals, reinforced by broken radio chirps, guided the flow. A helicopter thump returned, louder this time. Rotor wash kicked snow into the air, turning the basin into a white storm for seconds. The aircraft hovered near the designated landing zone, trying to keep out of the most obvious lines of fire. The pilot wasn't brave. The pilot was professional. He came because someone on the ground had finally given him a reason to believe he wouldn't be flying into a meat grinder. The medic watched from her ledge, eyes scanning for any last threat that could turn extraction into massacre. The enemy fired sporadically now, angry, poorly timed. Shots that hit snow, shots that hit rock. The kind of fire that sounded dangerous but lacked teeth. Men loaded wounded first, boots slipping on ice, hands numb as they hauled litters. The machine gun team covered arcs. A squad leader counted heads, shouting numbers into the wind like the wind could carry them somewhere safe. When the last wounded were loaded, when the helicopter lifted, when the basin finally began to empty, the medic stayed on her ledge for 2 more breaths. She didn't move until she was sure the mountain had nothing left to take. Then she slid back down into the ravine, hands raw, shoulders aching, rifle heavy as regret. By the time she reached the basin's edge, the fight was over in the way fights end in the mountains. Not with victory music, but with exhaustion and the slow realization of what it cost. At the outpost, fluorescent light turned everything the color of old paper. Steam rose from wet, gear hung on hooks. Men sat on benches with blankets around their shoulders, staring at nothing, replaying the day in silence. The ones who could talk didn't know what to say. The ones who couldn't talk just listened to the hum of heaters and the occasional distant gust. The medic moved bed to bed in the forward aid station, back in her expected role. Checking dressings, replacing fluids, rewarming hands. Her own hands shook only once, when she reached for a bandage and realized the danger had passed enough for her body to admit what it had been holding back. She closed her fingers into a fist until the tremor stopped, then continued. In the debrief room, the lieutenant sat with his arm in a sling, face pale but steady. The senior NCO stood with arms crossed, jaw clenched, his volume gone. The tech team laid out what they'd found. The sensor housing had been sabotaged. A cable cut, a component missing, not random, not damage, theft. The relay had been dirty because someone had been pushing interference through it, using it as a channel to jam their radios and monitor their responses. The ambush hadn't been a random sniper hunting for sport. It had been a deliberate operation meant to destroy or steal the sensor system and capture the tech, specifically the encryption module that made the data valuable. The sniper team had been the shield. Precision fire to pin the platoon in the basin, while maneuver elements tried to strip gear and vanish back into the pass. A propaganda-grade ambush. Bleed them, break them, take what mattered, leave survivors with a story that would echo. The boot prints made sense now. Disciplined spacing. Trained cell, not a lone gunman. An organized unit testing response time, mapping their habits, exploiting their timeline. When a lieutenant turned to the medic and asked, quietly, "How did you know where to go?" the room fell into a different kind of silence. The medic stood with her hands clasped behind her back, posture straight, eyes tired. She could have said, "I guessed." She could have said, "I got lucky." Instead, she reached in her chest pocket and pulled out the folded paper. The senior NCO's eyes narrowed, like he was watching someone violate a rule. The lieutenant watched like he was watching someone finally tell the truth. She unfolded it slowly. It wasn't dramatic. It was small. A photograph, worn at the edges, of her younger self at a range, standing beside someone older, both of them holding rifles, both of them squinting in the sun. Behind the photo was a commendation letter from a prior attachment, Months spent as a liaison on a marksmanship program before she'd been moved into medical full-time. A past she never talked about because it didn't fit the label they'd given her. "I learned to read lines," she said, voice flat, "before I learned to stop bleeding." The senior NCO looked like he wanted to argue, but the words died in his throat, because arguing required the belief that labels mattered more than results. The lieutenant nodded slowly. "You avoided the shelter line," he said. "Not a question. A recognition." She nodded once. "Clean silhouettes only," she replied. "No background risk." Restraint wasn't hesitation. Restraint was competence. She had waited when she had to wait and fired when she had to fire, not because she enjoyed it, but because the mountain demanded it. The room shifted, not into applause, not into cheers, into something quieter and deeper. Recalibration. People stopped talking over her. They started listening. The respect wasn't performative. It was practical. The kind of respect you give someone who has proven, in the worst possible moment, that they can carry weight. After the debrief, she returned to the aid station and walked the rows of cots again. She checked pulses, adjusted blankets, made sure hands were warm. She didn't celebrate. She didn't tell the story. She counted losses in her head, remembered faces, and felt the cost settle into her bones. Later, when the outpost finally quieted, when even the loudest men had run out of words, she stepped outside. The snow was still bright, still indifferent. The mountain looked the same as it had in the morning. White slopes, jagged ridges, wind carving new drifts as if erasing evidence. The air was cold enough to sting the inside of her nose. She stood there for a long moment, breathing slow, watching the pass. Somewhere out there, in the folds of rock and snow, the enemy's plan had failed. The sensor module might still be missing, but the propaganda victory had been denied. The kill chain had been broken. The platoon had survived because someone who wasn't supposed to matter had refused to stay still. She pressed a gloved hand to her chest pocket, feeling the folded paper warm against her skin again. Not as an anchor this time, as a reminder. The mountain didn't care what they called her. The mountain cared only about what she could do when silence turned violent. And in the silence between shots, she had proven what she'd always been.